I was looking through some of the write-ups this morning, political write-ups about all of the various candidates who would like to be our next president. It seems to me that lately the media has been exceptionally vigilant in trying to destroy Ben Carson. I read a columnist at the New York Times the other day who was just venting about Carson. The guy's name is Charles Blow. Funny name, I know, but he's been a columnist at the New York Times for many, many years, and I think sometimes these people get their jobs through affirmative action. He didn't like Herman Cain when Cain was running a few years ago. Do you remember all of those stories that suddenly popped up about all of these people Cain had supposedly women he tried to molest? And then as soon as Cain says, I've had enough of this and walked away, the stories and the accusers all disappeared? Didn't it seem a little too clean? As if, and all the people who knew Herman Cain kept saying, Herman? Are you kidding me? You're the last guy. Everyone said, well, you never know what a person is really like. Well, why didn't they follow up with the accusers following all of this? And why did the accusers, not go through with some sort of civil lawsuit? Was it just an attempt to remove somebody who the Republican establishment and especially the liberals feared? So they were going to smear him in any way they could and try to destroy him? I mean, literally destroy the man? Because he's not, how shall we put it, a plantation politician. Alan West has said this. Alan West, a person of color, retired from the Army, forced, we should point out, because he stood up for his troops in Iraq. But Alan West has pointed out the Democrat Party wants to keep blacks on the plantation, wants to keep them dependent, wants them to believe they need the Democrat Party to keep giving them stuff, wants to ensure they don't go out and succeed on their own. Well, a guy like Herman Cain succeeded very well on his own. He became a top corporate executive, talk show host as well. Done very, very well. And then you look at Ben Carson. Here was a guy who was growing up on the mean streets of Detroit, ended up cleaning himself up while he was still a teenager, goes off and ends up one of the top neurosurgeons, pediatric neurosurgeons, separating conjoined twins the planet's ever known. And yet it seems as if everything the man says, people say, well, he must really mean this. And it's not coming from his own fellow Republicans. It's not even coming from the Democrats who are running against him. It's coming from media. He must really mean this. Why don't you stick with the facts? We can determine what he really means on our own. And my guess is when you're trying to play fill in the blank, you're generally going to be wrong. So they don't like Ben Carson because the man has been a tremendous success. The latest, accusations that he left a sponge on a patient's brain. Getting big media coverage. Well, he must have been an incompetent surgeon. He'll be an incompetent president then. That's what they're trying to say. That's the message that the devious little people with their, how shall we put it, alcohol dependencies, running America's newspapers and various newsrooms, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to eliminate him from this race because he could be an example to other people, other minorities, of how you actually can succeed in this country, and they don't want that to happen. So he made an appearance with Alan Colmes. Now, Alan Colmes is a liberal radio talk show host and perhaps one of the homeliest human beings to ever walk the planet. Perhaps a little surgery from Ben Carson could clear that up for him. Carson doesn't necessarily do plastic surgery, but, he might be willing to do it as a charity case. And so this was Carson's response to all of this. My reaction is that I did 15,000 operations, and the people who oppose me have been crawling through every ditch, every place I've ever been my whole life looking for stuff. They found 5 or 6 disgruntled people. That's a very small number, and many of those cases never went anywhere because the legal system said, are you kidding me? And threw it out. Carson then said that such litigation is, quote, not for public discussion, unquote. Like litigation in other industries, medical malpractice lawsuits often include non-disclosure agreements which prevent parties from discussing cases. Now, as it turns out, it appears that the woman who claimed the sponge was left in her brain, it never actually happened. She did have a reaction, and apparently it's an allergic reaction. They were using the sponge because while they were doing the surgery, they're trying to, pick up any extra blood so they can see what they're working around. And number 2, sometimes to help cause a little separation between areas where you might be cutting. And yet she claimed and made this claim for a number of years, and now it says she's not commenting about it even herself. But the media is running with this as if somehow there's something here when it appears there's absolutely nothing there. And you think about that. If you do something 15,000 times in your life and you get 5 or 6 complaints, that's a pretty good record. And I find this to be, if they have an issue with Carson, one of the arguments is he fumbled an interview earlier this week when someone asked him about the debt ceiling. All right, then hammer him on the debt ceiling. But of course, most people in America go, debt ceiling, huh? Well, debt ceiling is a bit like your credit card company coming to you and saying, well, you've been a pretty good customer all along. You keep paying your bills and you keep borrowing lots more money. So we're going to raise that so you can borrow even more from us so we can get you for more interest. That's what the debt ceiling is like. And your federal government operates that way where it goes, okay, let's raise it some more. You can hammer Carson perhaps on that, but still, does it mean he would be a poor leader of the country? Because you really want someone in charge who's going to, as a president of such a big government, you can't handle everything. There's only 24 hours in a day and you've got to sleep sometimes. So you want someone who can pick good people and delegate some of that. Secondly, you want someone who knows right from wrong, and Ben Carson appears to know right from wrong. You don't need... Jimmy Carter was a nuclear physicist. He was a terrible president. Richard Nixon was considered by many to be the smartest man to ever occupy the White House, and yet he left it in disgrace. Franklin Roosevelt, on the other hand, was a C student. No one ever said he was very bright, but he got us through World War II on the strength of his personality. Ronald Reagan, may not have been a rocket scientist either, but again, he said, all right, I'm charting a course. This is the way we're going. Follow me. That's what a leader does. And a leader takes the slings and arrows that people throw at them. And right now, Carson's doing a pretty good job of that. There's an offshoot to all of this, and I want to bring this up. Who hasn't made a mistake in their job? About 15 years ago, I left a TV station I was working at, and on the very same day I left, Greg Kelley left. Greg was our morning news anchor. The name may not mean much anymore because he hasn't been on network TV in a few years. Greg had been a weekend anchor at Fox and Friends for a long time. He also was Fox main correspondent during the Iraqi War. Greg he's now anchoring morning news in New York City on the local Fox affiliate. It's a much more prominent role for him in his hometown. Before we hired Greg to work with us at the TV station, that would have been about 1999 or so, Greg had been serving in the U.S. Marine Corps. Major Kelley, when he left after 8 years of service, Major Kelley came to work and was a stellar employee, but one day he was a little concerned about a story he was working on, and he wanted to get some more facts before we went to air with it. We thought it was pretty airtight. We admired the fact, though, that he was so thorough. Our managing editor said to him, he said, Greg, let's be honest. He said, in your last job, Greg had been a Harrier jet pilot. If you've ever seen those in action, I was at an air show. I got invited to an air show by a friend of mine who used to serve with the Thunderbirds, and we went to see a Thunderbird performance, and they also had some Harrier jets that came in, and noisy, I should point out. I stood there on the beach watching these things. They're not easy to handle. Greg had handled one of those pretty well for a number of years in the Marine Corps. The managing editor said to Greg, he said, in your old job, if you made a mistake, you took out a neighborhood. In this job, the worst thing that could happen is you'll get us sued. And it broke the ice, and everybody in the newsroom had a good laugh about that. His story was very rock solid. We went with it, and it was one of those things that actually allowed him to move on up the ladder very quickly to the network level. But I think about that, and we all make mistakes in our jobs. And I've refrained from comment on this over the last couple of weeks. You had a terrible, terrible tragedy at a local hospital where a 7-month-old boy went in and got the wrong prescription, if you will. And prescription probably isn't the right description. He got the wrong treatment. He got an adult dose of what they were trying to give him by mistake because the nurse picked up the wrong bag, and the young boy was killed. If it had been my child, I'd be heartbroken. I'd probably be looking for some sort of what they call recompense. I'd want someone to try, but then again, that doesn't bring the child back. And the more I think about that, people are going to say, well, what a mistake. What are they doing over there? What dunderheads must they be? But it gets back to Carson's situation where 15,000 times, if he didn't get it right 5 times, 15,000 is still a heck of a track record. Even the best hitters in baseball only hit the ball 3 out of 10 times at bat. So if you get 1/3, that's considered pretty good. All I know is I've had a lot of friends who've worked in the medical professions, and they're like the rest of us. Sometimes something happens. They get called into work. They don't get enough sleep. Any number of things come along like that. And sometimes, but nobody intentionally. I mean, rare cases, and you hear about these once in a great while. Someone in a nursing home is picked up and arrested because they were giving something that would off the patients, and they thought they were doing somebody a favor by doing it. But that is so rare when it happens. Just that aberrant behavior in that situation, very, very low. Nobody in a hospital setting means anyone any harm. And yet we jump all over them if they make a mistake, because indeed, if they make a mistake, it can be deadly. If I make a mistake on the air, the next day I come on air and say, no, I didn't actually read that in the Weekly Standard. I read that over at National Review. And that's all I need to do. But the fact of the matter is, I've been hearing some complaints around the community about that, and I feel awful for everyone involved, because there's simply no way, if you do hundreds of thousands of procedures, which hospitals are going to do over time, that every once in a while something is going to go haywire, something is going to go wrong. And I know I'm sorry doesn't cut it with a family, and it probably never will, and nothing will ever improve that situation for them. But I can tell you, because I worked in a hospital setting for 5 years to put myself through college. I was in high school when I started, and I was still there when I graduated college. I can tell you that I got to know a lot of the various doctors and the nurses and people. I would sit down often and talk with them in the cafeteria when I was on my lunch break, or even when I was running the cafeteria, I would get to chat with them. And these were very, very well-meaning people. And yet, even in that situation, there were times I would encounter them. Sometimes I'd encounter people in tears in the cafeteria because something had gone wrong. Nothing that they intended. And you've got to stand back and say, if people have the right intentions and they make a mistake, you can't sit there and beat them up over it. You can't continue to hammer them about it. And all of these people in media who are now yapping about Ben Carson and his situation, which, as it turns out, the one case they cited wasn't even true, or the person making the claim exaggerated the claim or simply lied. But people in media, they always bury their apologies. We made a mistake on such and such story. You have to go to page A17 and read it in some tiny little paragraph at the very bottom of the page. You never see someone on the front page say, we made a huge mistake. I have been very willing, when I've been called upon to do it, or even when I haven't been called upon to do it, to come forward and say, hey, mea culpa. But you don't see it with the people in media who are attacking various candidates that they don't like. And you know what? I'll tell you what, one of my former bosses, he had worked with Walter Cronkite and said, let me tell you something. The man made some huge mistakes. I guess so. Bill Colley with you on Top Story.